Don't ruin my wife's party, my son yelled, shoving me. An hour later, they were crying in panic. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My own home looked like a battlefield after a hurricane. 40 people screaming, music blaring, broken bottles on the kitchen floor, my new television with a cracked screen, and red wine stains on the walls I had painted just 2 months ago. Danielle, my daughter-in-law, had decided to throw a party for her co-workers without even asking me. I had spent 3 hours trying to stay calm while watching them destroy everything I had built with so much effort. The velvet couch I bought with my savings had cigarette burns. The coffee table I inherited from my mother was covered in dirty glasses and overflowing ashtrays. The smell of alcohol and smoke had seeped into the curtains. The Persian rug my husband gave me before he passed away had beer stains that had filtered into the deepest fibers. A woman I didn't know had thrown up in my main bathroom and left a mess that made me nauseous just thinking about cleaning it. Another had spilled red sauce on my embroidered white tablecloth, the one I only use for special occasions. The furniture was out of place. There were crushed cigarette butts in my houseplants, and someone had broken my favorite crystal lamp. When I tried to ask them to be more careful, Danielle looked at me with that fake smile she always uses on me and told me not to worry, that she would take care of everything afterward. But I knew that was a lie. It was always a lie with her. Every promise, every apology, every "I'll fix it later, Mrs. Audrey" that came out of her mouth was one more lie I had chosen to believe, because I wanted to maintain peace in my family. Robert, my son, was out on the deck, laughing with his friends, as if none of this mattered, as if it wasn't his mother who was watching them turn her home into a disaster, as if the 40 years I spent working to buy every piece of furniture, every ornament, every detail of this house meant nothing to him. I walked over to him, trying to keep my voice low so I wouldn't make a scene, but I needed him to understand what was happening. I touched his arm gently and told him to please talk to Danielle, that things were getting out of control, that my house was not a bar, and that I hadn't given permission for this madness. I explained that I had just found one of her friends throwing up in my bathroom, and that there were stains all over the house that would cost a fortune to clean. I reminded him that this house was my home, the place where I planned to live out my last years in peace. Robert looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. He was my son, but at that moment, he seemed like a stranger. He got up from the chair, swaying a little. He had been drinking all night, and his face transformed into something that scared me. The expression I saw there was not that of the boy I raised, nor the man who had gotten married 5 years ago. It was something cold, cruel, full of a contempt that pierced me like an invisible dagger. He shoved me against the hallway wall with such force that I felt my back hit the doorframe. The physical pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to what I felt in my chest when he opened his mouth and yelled at me with a rage I had never seen in him. His words came out like poison, every syllable calculated to hurt me in the deepest part of my being. "Don't ruin my wife's party. This is your problem for being so bitter, always trying to ruin everything good that happens to us. Go to your room and leave us alone." Everyone at the party went quiet for a moment, as if they had witnessed something they shouldn't have seen. I felt all eyes fixed on me, some with pity, others with discomfort, and a few with that cruel satisfaction of someone who enjoys watching another person's humiliation. But then they went back to their music and their laughter, as if nothing had happened. As if seeing a woman of 69 years old being shoved and yelled at by her own son was a normal thing. I stood there against the wall, feeling the tears burn my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I wasn't going to give them the pleasure of seeing me cry. I wasn't going to become the spectacle they seemed to be enjoying so much. Danielle appeared behind Robert with a glass of wine in her hand, and that smile I hated so much. She didn't say anything, but her eyes told me everything. She had won. Oh, that's what she thought. Her friends surrounded her like a protective shield, whispering things I couldn't hear, but which were surely comments about the bitter mother-in-law who didn't know how to have fun. I watched as they all looked at me with that mix of pity and scorn that young women reserve for older women they consider obsolete. I walked slowly toward my bedroom, the only part of the house that still belonged to me, and locked the door. From there, I could hear the party continuing, the laughter, the way my house was turning into their amusement park. I sat on the edge of my bed, and for the first time in 69 years of life, I felt completely alone in the world. The noise continued until at 4 o'clock in the morning. Music, laughter, shouting, more bottles breaking, more unknown voices filling every corner of my home. When they finally left, I didn't leave my room. I knew I would find my home destroyed, and I didn't have the strength to see it right then. It was better to wait until dawn to face the reality of what had happened. But while I was lying there in the dark, listening to the silence the storm had left behind, something changed inside me. It wasn't sadness or pain I was feeling. It was something different, something cold and calculating that I had never experienced before. Robert had crossed a line of no return. He had humiliated me in front of strangers. He had shoved me as if I were an annoying obstacle. He had yelled at me as if I meant nothing to him. My whole life, I had been the mother who forgave everything, who justified everything, who endured everything for love. But that night, in the silence of my destroyed room, I made a decision that would change everything forever. I was no longer going to be the same Audrey Miller I had been until that moment. Tomorrow, I would start remembering things I had preferred to forget. Tomorrow, I would start asking the right questions and looking for the answers I had been avoiding. Because if my own son could treat me like that, if he could shove me in my own house and yell at me in front of strangers, then maybe there were many other things I didn't know about him. The morning arrived with a different kind of silence than usual. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence that comes before the storm, and I was ready to become that storm. When I came out of my room at noon the next day, the house looked like it had been hit by a tornado, but it wasn't just the physical mess that hurt. It was the certainty that something had changed forever between my son and me. As I cleaned up the broken glass and picked up cigarette butts from my plants, I couldn't stop thinking about how we had gotten here. I remembered the day Robert was born, 34 years ago. I was in labor for 18 hours in a public hospital where the nurses barely had time to look at me. His father had died in a construction accident when I was 6 months pregnant, so I faced everything alone. When I finally held him in my arms, that wrinkled, red baby, I promised him that he would never lack for anything. And I kept that promise. I worked double shifts at a textile factory for 15 years to pay for his private school. My hands became calloused and my back bent over those sewing machines, but he never wore patched-up uniforms like other neighborhood kids. He never lacked school supplies. He never went to bed hungry. He never had to walk in the rain because we didn't have money for the bus. When he turned 18 and wanted to study engineering, I sold the jewelry my mother had left me to pay for his tuition. They were the only memories I had of her, but I didn't hesitate for a second. Robert was my future, my hope, my reason for existing. I worked weekends cleaning offices to pay for his books, and when he got pneumonia in his second year, I spent all my savings on private doctors. I perfectly remember the day he graduated. I was there in the front row, wearing the black dress I had bought at the thrift store, because it was the only decent thing I owned. I cried when I heard his name. I cried when I saw him walk toward the podium. I cried when he hugged me and told me it was all thanks to me. That day, I believed that all the sacrifice had been worth it. Then came the good jobs, the salary of $3,000 a month, the elegant apartment he rented downtown, I still lived in the same small house where I had raised him, but I didn't care. It made me proud to know that my son had succeeded, that he was successful, that he wouldn't suffer the hardships I had suffered. When he met Danielle 6 years ago, I tried to be happy for him. She was pretty, educated, and came from a well-off family. But from the very first day, something in her eyes made me uncomfortable. The way she looked at me, as if I were an old piece of furniture that had to be tolerated. The way she talked about her parents, always mentioning trips to Europe, dinners at expensive restaurants, the beach house. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe it was normal for a daughter-in-law not to feel comfortable with her mother-in-law. Maybe I was too sensitive. But then I started noticing things. Like when Robert would cancel our Sunday lunches because Danielle had other plans. Like when he stopped visiting me during the week because his wife thought that was immature. The first time I truly felt excluded was at their wedding. I had saved for 2 years to buy him the engagement ring he wanted to give her, a 2-carat solitaire that cost $8,000. I sold my car and started taking the bus to work. But I didn't tell him anything. I just wanted him to be happy. But when the wedding day arrived, I sat in the 3rd row while Danielle's parents occupied the seats of honor. In the official photos, I appeared in the last ones, almost hidden behind the guests. Danielle had chosen every detail of that ceremony, and it was clear that my place in my son's life had changed forever. The first years of their marriage were characterized by gradual estrangement. The calls became shorter, the visits less frequent. Robert always had an excuse: work, social commitments, trips that Danielle planned. When I called him, he often answered quickly, as if my voice were an annoying interruption in his new, perfect life. Then came the comments, small cruelties wrapped in supposed concern. "Mom, Danielle thinks maybe you need a hobby, something to keep you busy so you don't feel so lonely. Oh, don't you think it would be better if you made friends your own age? Danielle says it's important to have an appropriate social circle." Every comment was a small stab, but I swallowed the pain and smiled, because I thought that if I was patient, if I was understanding, if I didn't cause problems, things would get better. I believed that the love I had built with my son for 30 years was stronger than any external influence. 2 years ago, when I turned 67, I organized a small dinner at my house. I had cooked all afternoon: turkey with gravy, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and freshly baked pumpkin pie. Everything Robert had loved since he was a child. I set the table with my good china and waited for 2 hours. He never came. He called me the next day to apologize, but I could hear Danielle laughing in the background. It was then that I started to suspect that something more was going on. It wasn't just the emotional distance. It wasn't just the lack of time. There was something calculated in the way they kept me away. Something intentional in the way Danielle had gradually taken control of every aspect of my son's life. Last night, when Robert shoved me against that wall, when he yelled at me in front of all those strangers, when I saw the satisfaction in Danielle's eyes, I finally understood the truth. It hadn't been a gradual, natural process. It had been a deliberate campaign to erase me from their lives. And I, in my naivety, had cooperated with my own disappearance. Now, as I finished cleaning up the last remnants of that horrible party, I realized that the time had come to stop being the mother who forgives everything and start being the woman who defends herself. Because maybe there were more things I didn't know. Maybe there were more betrayals I hadn't realized. And maybe it was time to start asking the questions I had been avoiding for too long. The first sign came 3 days after the party, when I went to check my mailbox. Among the usual bills, I found an official envelope from the county registry office that I wasn't expecting. My hands trembled as I opened it. and what I read there made me feel like the ground was moving under my feet. It was a notification about a real estate transaction related to my house. My house. The one I had bought with my own two hands, working for 20 years. The one I had paid for penny by penny. The one I believed was completely mine. According to the document, there had been an ownership update 6 months ago. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I immediately called Robert, but his phone rang straight to voicemail. I called 5 more times. Nothing. Finally, I sent him a text message. I urgently need to talk to you about some property papers that arrived. He replied 4 hours later. I'm busy, Mum. We'll talk tomorrow. But I couldn't wait until tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed, trying to remember when I had signed any document related to the house. And then, like a flash of lightning, something I had completely blocked out came back to me. 8 months ago, Robert had come home with Danielle one afternoon, smiling brightly, very affectionate. They said they had come to visit me, that they wanted to spend time with me. Danielle had even brought flowers and a chocolate cake. It seemed strange because she had never shown that kind of gesture, but I thought maybe she was making an effort to improve our relationship. During the visit, Robert asked me to sign some papers. It's just to update the information for the house, Mum, he said. You know the government is always changing the requirements. This will save you problems with taxes later on. I trusted him completely. He was my son. He was an engineer. He understood these things better than I did. The papers had many pages with small print that I was too lazy to read. Robert pointed to where I had to sign. Danielle smiled at me and told me how smart I was to keep everything in order. I signed where they told me to, without reading, without asking, without suspecting absolutely anything. Now, with that registry document in my hands, I understood what I had really signed that afternoon. They hadn't been updates to information. It had been something much more serious. I had put my house at risk, and I didn't even know it. The next day, I woke up early to go to the county registry office. The young woman who helped me looked at me with pity when I explained my situation. Mum, according to our files, you signed a document where you ceded 50% of the property to your son. You also signed an authorization for him to make future transactions without your direct consent. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Does that mean he can sell the house without me knowing? I asked. The girl nodded slowly. Technically, yes. He has legal power to make decisions about the property. I walked out of there like a zombie. My own house, the one I had bought with the sweat of my brow, was no longer completely mine. My son had tricked me into signing my own sentence, and I had been so naive that I hadn't even noticed. But that wasn't all. When I got home, I decided to check other documents I kept in my dresser. My bank certificate of deposit, my insurance policies, the papers for my small pension. Everything was there. But when I reviewed them more carefully, I found inconsistencies I hadn't noticed before. In my savings account, which I had kept at the same bank for 15 years, there were transactions I didn't recognize. Withdrawals of $500, $1,000, $1,500 that appeared every few months. When I added it all up, it was more than $15,000 that had left my account in the last 1.5 years. I called the bank immediately. Mrs. Miller, all these withdrawals were authorized by the person you registered as an authorized signer on your account. My blood ran cold. What authorized person? Your son, Robert Miller. He has complete access to your account since 2 years ago. 2 years? That meant that even before the party, long before he shoved me and yelled at me, Robert was already stealing from me. It wasn't just disrespect or ingratitude. It was a calculated plan to take everything I owned. I hung up the phone and sat there in the kitchen, trying to process everything. My son, the child I had raised alone, the one I had given everything to, was systematically stealing from me. And Danielle, with absolute certainty, knew everything. I then remembered other things I had ignored, like when Robert had asked me to sign some bank papers to simplify my paperwork, like when Danielle had casually commented that it was smart to have someone you trust managing your finances when you're getting older, like when they had convinced me to change my will to avoid legal problems later. Every memory was a piece of the puzzle that was finally starting to form a clear picture. It hadn't been a coincidence. It hadn't been gradual. It had been a planned theft, executed step by step over years, taking advantage of my blind trust and my unconditional love. That afternoon, when Robert finally called me back, his voice sounded irritated. "What papers are you talking about, Mum?" I explained what I had discovered at the registry office, and there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mum, you don't understand anything about these legal matters. Those documents are to protect you, so that when you're very old, you don't have to worry about these complicated things. Danielle and I are just looking out for your best interests." His tone was condescending, as if he were talking to a small child. "And the money that has been coming out of my account?" I asked. Another silence. "What money? Mum, I think you're confused. Maybe you should talk to the doctor. Sometimes stress causes memory problems." That was when I knew for sure that he wasn't just stealing from me, but that he also thought I was too stupid to notice. He was treating me as if I were a senile old woman who didn't understand her own affairs. "Robert, I want you to come over tomorrow so we can talk about this face to face." "I can't tomorrow, Mum. Danielle and I have plans. But don't worry about these things. Everything is under control." When he hung up, I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling something definitively break inside my chest. It wasn't just the financial betrayal. It was the way he treated me, as if I were a problem that had to be managed, an annoying obstacle in their perfect plans. But they didn't know something important about me. I wasn't the naive woman they thought I was. I had survived the death of my husband. I had raised a son alone. I had worked for decades to build what I had. And if they thought they were going to steal everything from me without me doing anything, they were very wrong. That night, I made a decision. I was no longer going to be the silent victim. I was going to find out exactly what else they had taken from me, and then I was going to get it all back. But I would do it in silence, with patience, with the same determination I had used to build my life from scratch. Robert and Danielle were about to find out that they had completely underestimated the woman they thought they could steal from with impunity. For the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own life. Every morning, I woke up with a cold determination I had never felt before. Robert and Danielle thought I was a confused old woman who didn't understand her own affairs, but they were about to discover how wrong they were. I started by making a list of everything I remembered signing in the last 3 years. There were quite a few times Robert had shown up with Danielle, always smiling, always with some convincing excuse for me to put my signature on documents I didn't read completely. "It's for your security, Mom. It's to save you problems with the government. It's better to be safe than sorry." Every paper I had signed now seemed suspicious. I checked every drawer, every folder, every envelope I kept in my house. I found copies of documents I didn't even remember receiving. Bank authorizations, changes to my insurance policies, modifications to my will, and something that made my hands tremble, a power of attorney that gave Robert total control over my financial decisions, in case I was declared mentally incompetent. Those two terrible words haunted me for days. mentally incompetent. Now I understood why Robert always insinuated that I was confused, that maybe I needed to see a doctor, that my memory wasn't reliable. It wasn't genuine concern. It was preparation. He was building a case to have me declared incapable of managing my own affairs. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. The plan wasn't just to gradually steal from me. The plan was to take everything from me at once, using that power of attorney, and then put me in some assisted living facility where I wouldn't be a problem for their new, perfect life. I decided I needed professional help, but I couldn't trust the family lawyer Robert had recommended to me 2 years ago. In secret, I looked for a lawyer specializing in family law and elder financial abuse. Her name was Andrea King. She was about 40 years old, and when I told her my story, her expression became very serious. "Mrs. Miller, what you are describing to me is a classic pattern of family financial abuse. Sadly, we see these kinds of cases more frequently than people imagine." She explained that my suspicions were correct, that the documents I had signed had indeed given Robert control over my assets. "Can I do anything to regain control?" I asked. Andrea nodded. "Yes, but it's going to require solid proof that you were tricked into signing these documents. We also need to demonstrate that you are completely mentally capable of making your own decisions." She asked me to bring every document I could find, and she also suggested something I hadn't considered: reviewing the records of calls and text messages between Robert and Danielle. Often in these cases, the perpetrators communicate their plans to each other. If we can prove there was a deliberate conspiracy to deceive you, that greatly strengthens your case. That night, as I thought about how to get that information, I remembered something. A year ago, when Danielle stayed over at my house because Robert was on a business trip, she had used my computer to check her email. Her password had been saved automatically in my browser. I didn't feel comfortable spying, but it wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about survival. With trembling hands, I opened the computer and accessed Danielle's email account. What I found there took the air out of my lungs. There were dozens of emails exchanged with Robert about me. "The old lady already signed the bank papers. Once we have full control, we'll convince her to sell the house and buy something smaller. My mum knows nothing about investments. We can manage her money however we want. It would be ideal if she decided to go to a retirement community. That way we'd have the house free." But the most painful were the emails between Danielle and her friends. "My mother-in-law is so naive she believes everything we tell her. Robert says in 5 more years he'll inherit everything. In the meantime, we'll use what we need. The poor old woman thinks we're a happy family. She has no idea what's coming." There were also emails with real estate agents asking about the value of my house, quotes for private assisted living facilities, and even conversations about how to convince me to move. The key is to make her believe it's her idea. If she thinks she's making the decision, she won't resist. Every email was a deeper stab. Not only were they stealing from me, they were mocking me, laughing at my naivety, planning my future as if I were an object that had to be moved from one place to another according to their convenience. I printed everything, every email, every conversation, every plan they had made behind my back. When I finished, I had more than 50 pages of evidence of their conspiracy against me. But just having the proof wasn't enough. I needed to understand exactly how much money they had taken from me and where it was now. Over the next few days, I went to every bank where I had accounts, requested detailed statements for the last 3 years, and asked for information about all the transactions I hadn't authorized directly. The picture that emerged was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just the $15,000 I had initially seen. In total, they had extracted more than $42,000 from my different accounts. My $25,000 certificate of deposit had been cancelled prematurely, and the money transferred to an account Robert had opened to manage my investments more efficiently. I also discovered that my life insurance policy had been modified. Before, I was the beneficiary of my own insurance, which meant that if I needed money for medical emergencies, I could use that fund. Now, Robert was the sole beneficiary, and the policy couldn't be modified without his authorization. Every discovery was like finding a new betrayal. For years, while I deprived myself of small luxuries to save money, while I changed brands at the supermarket to spend less, while I mended my old clothes instead of buying new ones, they were spending my savings as if they were their own. One afternoon, while reviewing the bank statements, the phone rang. It was Robert. His voice sounded irritated, as it always did lately when he spoke to me. "Mum, the bank called me saying you've been asking for a lot of copies of documents. What do you need all that for?" For the first time in weeks, I maintained perfect calm. "I'm just organizing my papers, son. You know, at my age, it's important to have everything in order." There was a pause. "Well, don't do anything without consulting me. Remember, I handle these things for you now." "Of course, Robert. I wouldn't do anything without consulting you." My voice sounded so natural that even I was surprised. I had learned to lie with the same ease that they had lied to me for years. When I hung up, I realized something important. It no longer hurt to talk to him. The betrayal had been so complete, so calculated, so cruel, that it had killed something inside me. The unconditional love I had felt for my son for 34 years had turned into something different. It wasn't hatred, because hatred requires passion. It was something colder, more calculated. It was the determination of a woman who had built her life from scratch and who wasn't going to let anyone, not even her own son, destroy it. That night, as I organized all the evidence I had gathered, I made a decision that would change everything. I was no longer going to continue being the victim. I was no longer going to pretend I didn't know what was happening. It was time to start the second part of my plan, getting back everything they had taken from me. But I would do it with patience, with strategy, with the same calculated coldness they had used on me. Robert and Danielle had made a fundamental mistake. They had completely underestimated the woman they thought they had defeated. Their mistake was becoming my advantage, and I was ready to use it. The first action I took was something I never thought I would do in my life. I hired a private investigator. Andrea, my lawyer, had recommended a man named Jack Torres, a former police officer in his 50s, who specialized in cases of family fraud. When we met in his small but tidy office, I showed him all the evidence I had collected. Jack reviewed every document with the meticulousness of someone who had seen this type of case many times. "Mrs. Miller, you have done an excellent job gathering this information. But we need more. I need to trace the money they took from you, and I also need to document the lifestyle your son and daughter-in-law are leading with your resources." He explained that he was going to investigate Robert and Danielle's bank accounts, their recent purchases, their investments, and any property they had acquired. If they are living above their declared income, that will be additional evidence that they are using your money illegally. While Jack did his work, I continued with my personal investigation. I had learned to be very careful, not to leave traces of what I was doing. Every time Robert called me, I acted like the naive, concerned mother he expected me to be. Every time Danielle sent me messages feigning concern, I replied with fake gratitude. A week later, Jack called me to his office with news that took my breath away. "Mrs. Miller, your son and daughter-in-law have been very busy with your money." He showed me photographs of a red sports car that Robert had bought 3 months ago, a car that cost $65,000, which he had paid for in cash. They also bought furniture for their apartment worth $15,000, and Danielle had plastic surgery that cost $8,000. Everything was paid for in cash, or with transfers from the accounts they controlled in my name. The photographs showed receipts, payment vouchers, and documents that proved every transaction. But the most shocking was the information about their real estate plans. They were looking at houses in an exclusive neighborhood last week. Houses costing $300,000. The real estate agent confirmed to me that they said they were expecting to receive an inheritance soon and that they could pay in cash. An inheritance they were expecting to receive soon. My inheritance. While I was still alive, they were already spending the money they expected to inherit when I died. The coldness of that realization went through me like a cold cramp. Jack had gotten even more disturbing information. I also investigated the phone records you asked me about. Your son and daughter-in-law have been in frequent contact with a lawyer specializing in declaring mental incapacity due to senility. Apparently, they have been consulting about the legal steps necessary to gain total control over your affairs. He showed me copies of emails between the lawyer and Robert, where they discussed strategies to demonstrate the cognitive decline of an older person. The lawyer had suggested documenting episodes of confusion, obtaining testimonies of erratic behavior, and creating a medical record to support the mental incapacity. Your son has been building a case to declare you mentally incompetent, Mrs. Miller. If he had succeeded, he would have gained total legal control over all your assets and decisions. The magnitude of the betrayal was so great that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Not only were they gradually stealing from me, they were planning to take everything from me at once and then lock me away somewhere where I would no longer be a problem for them. It was a plan so calculated, so cruel, that it seemed straight out of a nightmare. But I was no longer the same woman I had been a month ago. The pain had been replaced by a cold, calculated determination. Jack, what do I need to prove that I am completely sane and that they deliberately tricked me? He explained that I needed psychological and medical evaluations to prove my mental competency, and I also needed to document that I had been tricked into signing the documents under false pretenses. The good news is that we have clear evidence of conspiracy and fraud. The bad news is that it's going to be a long and costly legal battle. I don't care how much it costs or how long it takes, I told him with a voice that sounded firmer than I had heard myself in years. I want to get back everything they took from me, and I want them to face the consequences of what they have done. Over the next 2 weeks, I followed Andrea's instructions to the letter. I underwent extensive psychological evaluations with 3 different specialists. All concluded that I had perfect mental capacity for my age, excellent memory, and no signs of cognitive decline. The medical reports demonstrated that I was completely capable of making my own financial and legal decisions. I also hired a forensic accountant to trace exactly where every dollar of my money had gone. The numbers were devastating. In total, Robert and Danielle had extracted, transferred, or spent more than $85,000 of my funds in the last 2 years. They weren't small amounts taken gradually. They were large, calculated transfers that they had used to finance their lifestyle. The accountant found that they had opened investment accounts with my money, but the investments were in their names. They had bought stocks, bonds, and certificates of deposit using my funds as initial capital. Technically, they had stolen my money to make more money for themselves. Meanwhile, I continued to act as if I knew nothing. When Robert called me, I maintained normal conversations. When Danielle sent me occasional messages, I responded with the same cordiality as always. I even accepted an invitation to dinner at their place, where I acted like the grateful mother-in-law they expected me to be. During that dinner, which I now knew they had paid for with my money, I observed them with new eyes. The way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching, the complicit smiles they exchanged, the way they talked about their future plans, never including me. Everything had a different meaning now that I knew the truth. Danielle showed me her new ring, a diamond that must have cost at least $5,000. "Isn't it beautiful, Mrs. Audrey? Robert got it for me for our anniversary." I smiled and congratulated her, knowing perfectly well that the ring had been bought with my money. Robert talked about the new car he was considering buying. "It's a smart investment, Mum. Good brand cars hold their value." I feigned admiration, already knowing he had the cash to buy it because he had taken it from my accounts. But the conversation that impacted me the most was when Danielle casually mentioned that they had been looking at houses. "I think it's important to plan for the future, don't you, Mrs. Audrey? Especially when families change and needs are different." The way she said, "when families change," made me understand that they were already publicly planning a future without me. They didn't bother to disguise it because they thought I was too naive to understand the implications of what they were saying. That night, when I returned home, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea and reviewed all the legal documents Andrea had prepared. Lawsuits for fraud, for elder financial abuse, for falsification of documents, and requests to regain full control of my assets. Everything was ready. I had the evidence, I had the expert witnesses, I had the medical documentation proving my mental competency, and I had a complete trail of every dollar they had stolen from me. But before proceeding legally, I decided to give them one chance. Not because I forgave them, but because I wanted to see if there was any vestige of conscience in the son I had raised. I wanted to know if, when faced with the truth, Robert would show any genuine remorse. The next day, I sent him a simple text message. "Son, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over tomorrow?" His reply was typical. "What is it now, Mum? I hope it's not another one of your confusions with the bank papers." His confusions. Even when I was giving him the opportunity to do the right thing, he still treated me as if I were a senile old woman who didn't understand her own affairs. That response confirmed that I had made the right decision. There was no turning back. While I spent sleepless nights organizing evidence and meeting with lawyers, Robert and Danielle lived as if they were millionaires. Their social media was a constant exhibition of the luxury life they were financing with my money. Every day I checked their profiles, not out of masochism, but because Jack had explained that these posts were additional evidence of how they were spending my funds. Danielle uploaded almost daily photos of her culinary adventures. Elegant restaurants where dinner for two cost more than $200, imported wines that were worth more than my monthly pension, artisanal desserts that looked like works of art. In every photo, she appeared smiling, tagging Robert and writing phrases like, "Life is too short not to enjoy it," or "We deserve the best." Robert had developed an obsession with showing off his new professional lifestyle. Photos of his redesigned office with modern furniture that I recognized from the invoices Jack had obtained. Images of business meetings in exclusive clubs where membership cost $5,000 annually. Posts about his smart investments and strategic financial decisions. But what hurt the most were the posts where they appeared together, happy, celebrating achievements that they had financed with my savings. The photo from the day they bought the sports car, embracing in front of the dealership, with the caption, "When you work hard, dreams come true." The image of Danielle wearing her $8,000 pearl necklace with the phrase, "My husband knows how to make me feel special." There was something particularly cruel about the way they documented every luxury. It was as if they were celebrating not only their good fortune, but specifically the fact that they had achieved it by deceiving me. Every post seemed like a message directed at me, even though they didn't know I was seeing them. Danielle had started posting inspirational reflections about life that sounded like direct mockery of my situation. Sometimes you have to step away from negativity to find true happiness. The real family is the one you choose, not necessarily the one you get by blood. When you free yourself from toxic people, your life flourishes in incredible ways. Toxic people, negativity. I, who had worked for decades to give my son everything he needed, was now publicly classified as the negative influence they had had to free themselves from. And they were doing it using the money they had stolen from me to pay for the luxury that allowed them to feel superior to me. Robert had adopted a tone of a successful businessman that he had never had before. He posted motivational quotes about making difficult decisions to protect your future and not letting guilt stop you from doing what's best for your family. He constantly talked about his new investment opportunities and his financial expansion plans. His financial expansion plans. My money turned into his investment opportunities. My decades of saving transformed into his difficult decisions to protect his future. The most unbearable were the Mother's Day posts. Danielle had uploaded a photo of her with her own mother, accompanied by a long text about mothers who truly love their children unconditionally and support them in their adult decisions. Robert had reposted that image with the comment, "Lucky to have a mother-in-law who understands what true love means." A mother-in-law who understands true love, while I, his own mother, was classified as the obstacle they had had to free themselves from to be happy. But it wasn't just social media. Jack had been following them discreetly and brought me weekly reports of their activities. They ate lunch at expensive restaurants 3 times a week. Danielle got beauty treatments at a luxury spa every Friday. Robert had hired a private personal trainer that cost him $300 per session. They had started attending exclusive social events where they rubbed shoulders with wealthy people. Jack had photographs of them at charity galas, where tickets cost $500 per person, at art auctions, where they made bids of thousands of dollars, at private parties in mansions of well-known businessmen. They are building a public image of financial success, Jack explained to me. They want to be perceived as a prosperous couple who belongs to the high social circles. But their declared income does not justify this level of spending. The only additional source of money we have recorded is the funds they have extracted from your accounts. The contrast was brutal. While they lived like new money, I had started rationing my expenses even more than normal. Not because I really needed to, but because it was psychologically impossible for me to spend money knowing I was being robbed. I bought the cheapest brands at the supermarket, mended my old clothes instead of buying new ones, and had cancelled small luxuries like my cable subscription. One afternoon, while reviewing the most recent photographs Jack had brought me, I found something that made me feel physically nauseous. It was an image of Danielle in an elegant jewelry store, trying on a diamond bracelet. The date of the photo was the day before, and the price visible on the tag was $12,000. $12,000. More than I had spent on myself in the last 3 years. And she was trying it on as if it were something natural, something she deserved, something she had earned with her own effort. That night, I received a call from Robert. His voice sounded strangely cheerful, more animated than I had heard it in months. "Mum, how are you? I wanted to tell you that Danielle and I are very excited because we found the perfect house. It's a little pricey, but we think it's a smart investment for our future." He told me about the house as if he were sharing good news with me. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a large yard, a pool, in an exclusive neighborhood where successful doctors and lawyers lived. It's going to cost $350,000, but we have a solid financial plan to pay for it. His solid financial plan. My inheritance they expected to receive when I died, combined with the money they had already stolen from me. Don't you think it's exciting, Mum? We're finally going to have the space we need to grow as a family. Grow as a family. As if I wasn't part of that family. As if my death were simply a necessary step in their growth plans. It sounds wonderful, son, I managed to say with a stable voice. I'm very happy for you. When I hung up the phone, I sat there in my small kitchen, in my house that was no longer completely mine, thinking about the $350,000 house they were going to buy with my money. Thinking about the $12,000 jewelry Danielle had tried on yesterday. Thinking about the luxury life they were living while treating me as if I were an annoying burden that had to be managed. But I no longer felt pain. The pain had been replaced by something more powerful, the absolute certainty that the time had come to act. Robert and Danielle had made the mistake of completely underestimating the woman they thought they had defeated. Tomorrow would be the day they would discover how wrong they were. The moment I had been preparing for weeks finally arrived on a Tuesday morning. Andrea had confirmed to me that all the legal documents were ready, that the lawsuits had been officially filed, and that the court orders to freeze Robert and Danielle's bank accounts would take effect at noon. But before the legal processes began, I wanted to do something I had carefully planned. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Robert arrived at my house with that look of contained irritation he had adopted whenever he had to deal with Mom's problems. He came alone, because Danielle was at the spa receiving a $200 facial treatment that, like everything else, had been paid for with my money. What did you want to talk about, Mum? I hope it's important because I have a meeting at 11. He sat on my couch as if he were doing me a great favor by dedicating a few minutes of his valuable time. I sat across from him with a box of documents I had prepared especially for this moment. My voice came out calmer than I had expected. Robert, I want to talk to you about the money you've been taking from my accounts. His expression changed immediately. The irritation turned into something that looked like genuine surprise. But I already knew that face. It was the same look he had when he was a child, and I caught him lying about his grades or about pranks he had pulled. What are you talking about, Mum? I haven't taken any of your money. I think you're confused again. His tone was condescending, as if he were talking to a child who had invented a fantastic story. I took the first document out of the box. It was a bank statement with all the withdrawals marked in red. $85,000, Robert. That's the exact amount you've extracted from my different accounts in the last 2 years. I saw him swallow, but he maintained his composure. Mum, I have legal authorization to manage those accounts. Everything I've done has been to protect your financial interests. You yourself signed the documents that gave me that authorization. You're right, I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm. I signed those documents because you told me they were to update my information with the bank, because I trusted you completely, because I never thought my own son would lie to me to steal from me. I took out the second set of documents, the photographs of the sports car, the receipts for Danielle's jewelry, the vouchers Imam Yates for the expensive restaurants, the information about the $350,000 house they were planning to buy. All of this has been paid for with my money, Robert. The car you bought in cash. The jewelry you've given Danielle. The beauty treatments, the elegant dinners, the exclusive club membership. Everything financed with your mother's savings. His face turned pale, but he kept trying to maintain control. Those are normal expenses, Mom. Danielle and I work hard, and we have the right to enjoy our income. Your income? I asked. I pulled out Jack's reports on their actual finances. Your salary as an engineer is $4,000 a month. Danielle's salary at her marketing office is $2,500 a month. Together you earn $6,500 a month. But in the last 6 months, you have spent more than $50,000 on luxuries. The math was irrefutable. There was no way they could maintain that lifestyle with their real incomes. Robert was silent for the first time since he had arrived. I then pulled out the copies of the emails I had found in Danielle's account. The plans to declare me mentally incompetent, the conversations about selling my house, the mockery of my naivety, the references to my death as a financial opportunity. I also know about the lawyer you consulted to declare me senile, Robert. I know about the plans you had to put me in an assisted living facility when you gained total control over my assets. I did exactly what you thought of me while you pretended to care about my well-being. Reading those emails out loud was like watching the mask he had worn for years crumble. Every phrase I read, every cruel plan I revealed, every mockery I exposed, made him shrink more on the couch. When I finished reading, the silence in the room was so heavy I could hear the tick-tock of the kitchen clock. Robert had his head in his hands, but it wasn't repentance I saw in his posture. It was panic at having been discovered. Mum, I can explain everything. Things aren't what they seem. Danielle and I just wanted to secure your future, to protect you from— Stop! My voice sounded louder than it had in years. I don't want any more lies, Robert. I don't want any more explanations. I want you to know that as of 1 hour ago, all the bank accounts you controlled in my name have been frozen by court order. I saw the information hit his brain like a lightning bolt. His eyes opened completely and he straightened up on the couch. What does that mean? It means you no longer have access to a single penny of my money. It means the $12,000 diamond bracelet Danielle was trying on yesterday won't be bought. It means the $350,000 house you were planning to buy will have to wait. He stood up abruptly from the couch. You can't do that. I have legal authorization. I have power of attorney. You had power of attorney, I corrected him. Power you obtained by deceiving me. But it turns out that when it can be proven that a person was coerced or tricked into signing legal documents, those documents can be annulled. I showed him the psychological evaluations certifying my complete mental competency, the medical reports confirming that I had no cognitive decline, and the legal documents annulling all the powers I had unknowingly granted him. I have also sued for fraud, for elder financial abuse, and for conspiracy, Robert. I have evidence of everything. Every dollar you spent, every lie you told, every plan you made behind my back. His reaction was exactly what I had expected. There were no genuine apologies. There was no acknowledgement of the harm he had caused me. Only rage at having lost the control he thought he had over me. This is ridiculous. You don't understand anything about finances. We were just taking care of you. Without us, you would be a lonely, vulnerable old woman. Without you, I said, getting up from the couch with a dignity I hadn't felt in years. I am a 69-year-old woman with $85,000 more in my bank accounts. The realization that he had completely lost control of the situation hit him like a brick wall. Mum, we can fix this. We can give the money back. We can talk to the lawyers. We can find a solution. The solution is already underway, son. Right now, Danielle is receiving the legal notification at the spa. This afternoon, both of you will receive the official summonses to appear before the judge. And tomorrow, all the documentation for this case is going to be public. The mention of the case becoming public made him even paler. His professional reputation, his image on social media, his membership in the exclusive club, everything depended on maintaining the appearance of being a successful, upstanding man. Please, Mum, we can handle this privately. There's no need to involve the courts. For the first time since the conversation had begun, I smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, but one of deep satisfaction. Robert, for 2 years you managed my affairs privately. You lied privately, stole privately, conspired privately. Now it's time for everything to be handled publicly." He walked toward the door with a trembling step, but stopped before leaving. "This is going to destroy our family, Mom." "No, son," I told him with a calm that surprised even myself. "Our family was destroyed the day you decided that stealing from me was easier than respecting me. All I'm doing is officially acknowledging something that had already happened." When the door closed behind him, I sat back down on my couch and took a deep breath. After weeks of silent planning, after months of pain and humiliation, the moment of truth had finally arrived. The war had officially begun, and for the first time in a long time, I had all the weapons. What followed that confrontation was like watching a house of cards crumble in slow motion. For 2 weeks, I watched from a distance as the perfect life Robert and Danielle had built with my money turned into a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. The first sign of the collapse came that very afternoon, when Danielle returned from the spa screaming hysterically. Jack had managed to get an audio recording of that conversation, because they had a contact in the building where they lived. The screams could be heard from the hallway. "Your crazy mother is suing us. She says we stole money from her. They're going to freeze all our accounts." Robert's response was exactly what I had expected from him. He didn't take responsibility for anything, but instead tried to blame her. "I told you to be more discreet with the expenses. I told you not to post so many photos of the jewelry. Now she knows everything because of you." His first reaction was not remorse or concern for the harm they had caused me. It was panic about the consequences they were going to face. Throughout that first night, they were making desperate calls to lawyers, trying to find some way to stop the legal process that had already begun. The next day, when they tried to access the bank accounts they controlled in my name, they discovered that all of them had indeed been frozen. The ATM rejected their cards, the electronic transfers were blocked, and when they called the bank, they were informed that there were pending court orders preventing any movement of funds. That was the moment when reality hit them completely. For 2 years, they had lived as if my money were theirs, spending without restriction, planning large purchases, feeling the security of having unlimited resources. Overnight, they were left with only the income they actually had. $6,500 a month to maintain a lifestyle that cost more than $15,000 a month. The consequences were immediate and brutal. Robert had to cancel the purchase of the second car he had been considering, a $70,000 SUV he was going to pay for in cash. Danielle had to suspend all her spa appointments, her beauty treatments, and her weekly designer clothing purchases. The exclusive club membership had to be cancelled because they couldn't pay the $800 monthly fee. But the most devastating was when the car dealership came to repossess the red sports car. It turned out that even though they had paid for it in cash, they had used that car as collateral for a $30,000 personal loan they had taken out to finance their other luxuries. When the accounts were frozen, they couldn't make the monthly loan payment, and the bank ordered the vehicle's seizure. Jack brought me photographs of that humiliating moment. Danielle crying on the sidewalk while the tow truck took away the car that had been their symbol of status. Robert arguing with the bank employees, trying to explain that it had been a misunderstanding, that the money would be available soon, that they just needed more time. But it wasn't just the loss of material possessions that was destroying them. It was the public exposure of their fraud. As I had promised, all the documentation in the case became public, and the local media immediately took an interest in the story. "Engineer accused of stealing $85,000 from 69-year-old mother" was the headline that appeared in the city's main newspaper. Robert's professional reputation disintegrated in a matter of days. His colleagues at the engineering firm started avoiding him. His clients began cancelling contracts, and his boss called him into a disciplinary meeting where he was informed that he was being suspended without pay while the legal case was resolved. Danielle faced similar consequences at her marketing job. Her boss, an older woman who felt personally offended by what they had done, fired her immediately, alleging that the company could not keep employees involved in elder abuse scandals. Overnight, they found themselves without the income they had, without access to the money they had stolen, and with fixed expenses they could no longer afford. The elegant apartment downtown, which they rented for $3,000 a month, became unsustainable. The minimum payments on the credit cards they had used to supplement their expenses quickly piled up. The most satisfying thing for me was seeing how their social circle immediately abandoned them. The same people who had been celebrating with them at parties and expensive restaurants completely disappeared when the scandal became public. The contacts from the exclusive club no longer returned their calls. Danielle's friends, who appeared in all her Instagram photos, stopped inviting her to events. Their social media, which had been showcases of their perfect life, became digital cemeteries. There were no more photos of elegant restaurants because they didn't have money to pay for them. There were no more images of new jewelry because they couldn't buy it. The motivational posts about success and financial freedom completely disappeared. After 3 weeks of silence, I received the call I had been waiting for. It was Robert, and his voice sounded completely different from how I had heard it in years. There was no trace of the condescending arrogance he had adopted with me. There was only pure desperation. "Mum, please, I need us to talk. Danielle and I are going through a very difficult situation. I think we can find a solution that works for everyone." His change in tone was so dramatic that it almost made me laugh. The man who had shoved me against the wall, yelling at me not to ruin his wife's party, was now speaking to me with the humility of someone who finally understood his real position. "What kind of solution do you have in mind, Robert?" I asked. My voice remained cold and controlled. "We can give all the money back, Mom. All of it. And we can apologize to you publicly. We can admit that we made terrible mistakes. We just ask that you withdraw the lawsuits and that we can handle this as a family." Terrible mistakes. After 2 years of systematic theft, calculated lies, and plans to declare me mentally incompetent, he now called it terrible mistakes. "Robert, the money you spent can no longer be returned. Danielle's jewelry, the beauty treatments, the dinners at expensive restaurants, the trips, all of that no longer exists. How do you plan to return money that you already consumed?" There was a long silence before he replied. "We can make a payment plan. We can work harder, get additional jobs, sell our things. We'll give you everything we have, and then we'll pay the rest monthly." It was interesting how panic had suddenly made them willing to work harder and get additional jobs. For 2 years, they had preferred to steal from me rather than make the extra effort they were now desperately offering. "And is Danielle on board with this plan to work harder to pay me back what you stole from me?" "Yes, Mom. We are both completely in agreement. We know we made serious mistakes, and we want to do the right thing." They wanted to do the right thing. Not because they truly understood the harm they had caused me, but because the consequences of their actions had finally caught up with them. "Robert, I appreciate you calling me, but the lawsuits will continue. This case is going to trial, and you will face all the legal consequences of what you did." "But Mom, we're family. Families resolve their problems without involving the courts." Now we were family again. When they had control over my money and planned to put me in an assisted living facility, I was the toxic mother-in-law they had to free themselves from. When they lost and desperately needed my forgiveness, they suddenly remembered we were family. "You're right, Robert. Families resolve their problems without courts. Too bad you decided to steal from me instead of talking to me like family. When I hung up the phone, I felt lighter than I had in years. The son I had raised, who I had loved unconditionally, who I had sacrificed everything for, was finally experiencing the real consequences of his decisions. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt completely in control of my own life. 6 months after everything began, I was sitting in the yard of my new house, a small but beautiful property I had bought with the money I recovered from the lawsuit. It was a perfect Saturday morning, with the sun filtering gently through the leaves of the lemon tree I had planted the week before. In my hands, I had a steaming cup of chamomile tea, and for the first time in years, the silence around me was not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of peace. The trial had lasted 4 months and had been devastating for Robert and Danielle. The evidence we had presented was so complete, so irrefutable, that their lawyers recommended settling before the case went to a public jury. In the end, they were forced to return not only the $85,000 they had stolen from me, but also additional damages for fraud and financial abuse that raised the total amount to $120,000. To pay that sum, they had to sell absolutely everything they had bought with my money. Danielle's jewelry went to a pawn shop, where they got barely a fraction of what they had originally paid. The elegant furniture from their apartment was sold at a public auction that was advertised in the local newspapers. They even had to sell their wedding rings to complete the amount they owed me. The public humiliation was complete. The case had attracted media attention as a perfect example of family financial abuse, and their names appeared in newspaper articles, television reports, and radio programs discussing the growing problem of adult children financially exploiting their elderly parents. Robert could never return to his engineering job. His professional reputation had been completely destroyed, and no company in the city wanted to hire someone who had been publicly exposed as a scammer who stole from his own mother. He ended up working temporary construction jobs, earning less than half of what he had earned before. Danielle couldn't get another job in marketing either. Her firing for fraud appeared in her job references, and companies in the advertising industry are particularly sensitive to scandals that can damage their image. The last I heard of her, she was working as a waitress in a fast food restaurant, far from the luxury restaurants where she used to dine with my money. Their marriage did not survive the pressure. When they were left without money, without respectable jobs, and without the social circle that had defined them, they discovered that they had absolutely nothing in common besides their shared love for luxury that they could no longer afford. They divorced 8 months after the trial, in a nasty legal battle where each blamed the other for the situation they were in. Throughout that time, I maintained complete silence. I didn't answer any of Robert's desperate calls. I didn't reply to the text messages where he begged me to forgive him. I didn't react to the letters Danielle sent me promising she had learned her lesson. My silence was not cruelty. It was the most powerful answer I could give them. I had learned that sometimes dignity requires saying nothing at all. With the money I recovered, I not only bought my new house, but I also invested wisely in certificates of deposit and government bonds that guaranteed me stable income for the rest of my life. I hired a personal accountant and a financial lawyer who ensured that I could never again be a victim of this type of abuse. My new house was perfect for this stage of my life. 2 bedrooms, a small but functional kitchen, and a garden where I could grow the herbs I use for cooking. It wasn't luxurious, but every penny it had cost came from my own savings, honestly earned, without deceiving anyone, without stealing from anyone. The neighbors in my new neighborhood knew nothing about my previous story. To them, I was simply Audrey, a kind lady who tended her garden, who always had time for a nice chat, and who made the best Thanksgiving turkey and mashed potatoes on the block for the holiday gatherings. I had found a routine that filled me with satisfaction. Every morning I woke up when my body was ready, without rush, without obligations that I hadn't chosen myself. I prepared my breakfast calmly, watered my plants, and then sat down to read or listen to classical music on the radio. On Sundays, I had started attending a small neighborhood church, not so much out of religious devotion, but because I liked the community of older women who gathered after the service for coffee and conversation. They were real, honest conversations, without pretense, very different from the superficial interactions I had had with Danielle and her friends. One of those women, Samantha, had become something like a friend. She was 72, a widow like me, and had a perspective on life that I found refreshing. She knew I had gone through family difficulties, but she never asked for details, and I appreciated that discretion. At our age, she had told me once while we were having tea in my new kitchen, we no longer have time for relationships that take energy away from us instead of giving us energy. She was right. For decades, I had invested my emotional energy in a relationship that drained me, that made me feel small, that turned me into a lesser version of myself. Now, for the first time in years, I could use that energy for things that really mattered to me. I had started taking painting classes at the community center. It was not something I had ever considered in my previous life, but now I had time, I had resources, and more importantly, I had the mental freedom to explore parts of myself that had been dormant for years. I had also joined a reading group where we discussed novels that I had never had time to read when I was working double shifts to pay for Robert's education. It was surprising to discover that at 69 years old, I could still learn new things. I could still have stimulating intellectual conversations. I could still surprise myself. One afternoon, while I was watering my cherry tomatoes, I heard someone knocking at my door. For a moment, my heart raced, thinking it might be Robert. But when I opened it, I found an elderly man with a small bouquet of wildflowers. It was Benjamin, my next-door neighbor, a gentleman of 71, who had lost his wife 2 years ago. We had exchanged polite greetings during the months I had been living there, but we had never had a real conversation. "Mrs. Audrey," he said with a shyness I found charming, "I saw you planted cooking herbs in your garden, and I thought maybe you'd like these wildflowers to complement them." It wasn't romance I was looking for, nor was he offering it. It was something simpler and more valuable. Honest companionship, genuine conversation, the possibility of a friendship without hidden agendas. That night, as I prepared my dinner for one in my small kitchen, I reflected on the path I had travelled since that horrible night of the party. I had lost a son, but I had gained my dignity. I had lost the illusion of a united family, but I had found the reality of my own strength. The phone rang while I was doing the dishes. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard Robert's voice. He sounded older, more tired, different from how I remembered him. "Mum, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I needed to tell you something. I've been in therapy, trying to understand how I came to do what I did to you. I want you to know that I now understand they weren't mistakes. They were conscious and cruel decisions, and there's no excuse for what I did." His voice broke a little at the end, and for a moment, the maternal instinct that had defined my life for decades threatened to resurface. But I kept it controlled. "Robert," I said in a calm voice, "I appreciate you calling to say that. But you need to understand that forgiveness is not something I can give you now. Maybe I can never give it to you. That is a consequence of your decisions that you are going to have to learn to live with." "I understand, Mom. I just wanted you to know that every day I think about what I lost when I decided to treat you the way I did. I didn't just lose the money or the job or the reputation. I lost the person who loved me most in the world, and it was my own fault. When I hung up the phone, I didn't feel satisfaction or pain. I felt something more powerful: indifference. The call hadn't changed anything for me. It hadn't reopened wounds. It hadn't created false hopes. It was simply information I had received and processed without it affecting my peace. That night, before falling asleep in my new bed, in my new house, in my new life, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, a woman who allowed herself to be humiliated because she believed that was love, a woman who accepted crumbs of affection because she was afraid of being completely alone, a woman who confused sacrifice with virtue. That woman had died the night Robert shoved me against the wall. In her place, this new version of myself had been born, a woman who knew the difference between being alone and being at peace, a woman who had learned that self-respect is non-negotiable, a woman who understood that sometimes true love requires firm boundaries. I closed my eyes with a small smile on my lips. Tomorrow I would wake up in my own house, bought with my own money, to live a life I had chosen completely for myself. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't sought revenge. I had simply proven the truth. I had recovered what was mine and closed the door on those who didn't value me. That was my greatest victory, not having become someone I wasn't to win a war they had started. 18 months have passed since everything ended, and this morning I woke up thinking about something I hadn't considered before. How many times during my life had I apologized for things that were not my fault? For existing, for needing, for aging, for taking up space in other people's lives. I am sitting on my small deck, watching how the bougainvillea flowers I planted last year have grown so much that they now cover almost the entire fence. They are a vibrant pink color that reminds me of the dresses I used to wear when I was young, before I learned to dress in muted colors so as not to draw attention or seem inappropriate for my age. Last week I bought a new dress. It's coral-colored, with a small floral print, and when I tried it on in the store, the saleswoman, a girl about 25 years old, told me, "Ma'am, that color makes you look radiant." Radiant. I don't remember the last time someone had described me with that word. I wore it to Samantha's birthday dinner, and for the first time in decades, I didn't worry if it looked appropriate, or if someone would think a woman my age shouldn't wear such bright colors. I wore it because I liked it, because it made me feel alive, because at 70 years old, I had finally learned that my comfort was more important than the approval of strangers. In these months, I have discovered things about myself that I didn't know existed. For example, that I have a good eye for decorating small spaces. My modest house has become a cozy refuge full of plants, books, and small treasures I have found at flea markets. Every object has a story, but they are all stories that I chose, not painful memories that tie me to the past. I also discovered that I enjoy cooking for myself in a completely different way than when I cooked out of obligation. Now I experiment with spices I had never used. I prepare small portions of dishes that intrigue me, and I eat slowly, savoring every bite without rushing. Benjamin, my neighbor, has become an occasional dinner companion. It's not romance, although I admit there is a comfort between us that I hadn't experienced with any man since my husband died so many years ago. We share stories about our gardens, discuss the books we read, and sometimes we just sit in comfortable silence on my deck as the sun sets. 3 months ago, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Andrea Miller, a distant niece who had lost touch with me years ago. She had heard about my situation through other relatives and wanted to reconnect. She wrote to me, "Aunt Audrey, I always remembered how strong you were when I was a child. Knowing what you faced and how you came out ahead inspires me a lot. It made me reflect on the legacy I am leaving. For decades, I thought my purpose in life was to sacrifice myself for my family, especially for Robert. I believed that the success of my motherhood was measured by how much I was willing to suffer for my son. Now I understand that perhaps my true legacy is demonstrating that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to reclaim your own dignity, to choose peace over toxic relationships. Last month, while organizing my financial documents, I found an old photo of Robert when he was 8 years old. He was smiling with that genuine smile of a happy child, with the slightly crooked teeth he refused to fix with braces. For a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia, not for the relationship we had lost, but for the innocence of those days when love was simple and had no hidden conditions. But the nostalgia quickly passed. That 8-year-old boy became a man who chose to betray me, steal from me, and plan my future as if I were an annoying burden. The decisions he made as an adult cannot be erased by the tenderness of his childhood years. I put the photo in a box with other memories that I prefer to keep in the past. I didn't throw it away because I don't feel hatred, but I also didn't put it in a visible place because it is no longer part of my present. My current routine includes things I never thought I would do. On Tuesday mornings, I take water aerobics classes at the community centre, surrounded by other women my age who, like me, have decided that staying active is a form of rebellion against the idea that aging means becoming invisible. On Thursday afternoons, I participate in a book club where we discuss novels written by women. Last week, we read a book about a woman in her 50s who left her 25-year marriage to start a new life. During the discussion, I commented that it's never too late to start over, and several women in the group nodded with a comprehension that only comes from lived experience. On Sundays, I still attend church, not so much out of religious devotion, but because I appreciate the community. During coffee hour after the service, I listen to stories from other women who have faced similar family betrayals. It's surprising and sad how many of us have gone through similar experiences. One of them, Ivana, told me that her daughter had scammed her into selling her house and moving to a small apartment, promising her that she would invest the money wisely for her future. The money disappeared into her son-in-law's gambling debts. Another, Theodora, discovered that her son had been forging her signature to get loans using her house as collateral. These conversations have taught me that my story is not unique. There is a silent epidemic of financial abuse towards elderly people, especially by family members who take advantage of trust and unconditional love. But I have also learned that many women, like me, find the strength to fight and reclaim their dignity. I have carefully invested the money I recovered from the lawsuit. I have enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, without depending on anyone. That financial security has given me something I hadn't had in years: the freedom to make decisions based on what I want, not on what I need to survive. For the first time in decades, I buy new books instead of waiting for them to arrive at the library. I allow myself fresh flowers for my dining table every week. When my old refrigerator started to fail, I bought a new one without having to ask anyone's permission or justify the expense. They are small freedoms, but after years of living with self-imposed restrictions to save money that was later stolen, each one feels like an act of personal rebellion. This morning, while preparing my coffee, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was from Danielle. "Mrs. Audrey, I know I don't have the right to write to you, but I wanted you to know that I've been reflecting a lot on what happened. I hope you're doing well." I read the message twice and then deleted it without replying. It wasn't out of cruelty, but out of clarity. There is nothing Danielle can say that will change what happened, and there is nothing I need to say that will improve my current situation. My silence is my most powerful response. At the end of each day, When I turn off the lights of my small house and prepare for sleep, I feel a deep satisfaction that I hadn't experienced in years. It's not the satisfaction of vengeance fulfilled, but something more valuable, the satisfaction of having recovered my self-worth. At 70 years old, I have finally learned that real love, the love that is worthwhile, never requires you to sacrifice your dignity. I have learned that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. And I have learned that the greatest strength I can have is the ability to close the door on those who do not value me, without hatred, without drama, simply with the silent certainty that I deserve something better. That is the woman I have become, a woman who chooses her own peace above everything else.